Autism and religion. Hot topic, right? Well, there's much out there on the interwebs about how and why autistic people reject religion. So what about me? Am I religious? Well, yes, absolutely. Actually, no, not in the slightest. But maybe this is actually completely the wrong question. Let's discuss. Hi, I'm Phil, a late diagnosed autistic adult, and it's my goal to help advocate for older autistic people by talking about my experiences and relating them to issues relevant to older autistic adults. If this is you, welcome. So let's get straight into today's topic about autism and religion. At the top, I made a completely ambiguous statement that I am both religious and not religious as an autistic person. How can that make any sense? Just sitting on the fence, right? Well, no, both of those statements are true, but as always, the devil is in the detail. That's probably the wrong cliche for this topic, or is it? Also, before we dive in, I want to flag that I mentioned some controversial issues, including gender, in this podcast. It's not my intention here to resolve the theology of that issue, but I include it as it is an issue of significance to many autistic people. If your theological view is different, I ask that you allow some grace and keep listening, as I'm not going to try and push any particular point, but there are some good points about autism you'll miss if you switch off, and that is the key focus. Okay, so first up, where do I stand on religion, faith, church, and above all, God? As I've said, I'm not religious, but I do have a personal faith and a belief in God. But I do not currently go to church. A backslider. Aren't people's opinions fun? So again, how can I say I have faith but not be religious? Well, one way to look at it is that religion is about the rules and rituals of the religious community. Faith, on the other hand, is about absolute personal certainty in the existence of God and the commitment to a personal relationship with him/her. Now, a quick note at this point on language. I refer to God as him/her, but I could also refer to God as them/they, as I also believe that as we are all made in God's image, he embodies all genders. But moving forward in this podcast, I will simplify the language to him, as that is what resonates most strongly with me. But substitute in what best resonates for you from your own experience. So going back to the topic of religion, this is the term that is generally used to encompass all aspects of faith, church, beliefs, ritual, rules, and the whole history and culture that it represents. This is problematic in general, but particularly from my autistic perspective. Now, also at the outset here, I want to declare that my experience of religion is from a Western Christian perspective, but I believe these points could also be relevant to any other religious framework, whether it be Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, New Age Enlightenment, or any other organised religious group. So, before I said that religion is a bit problematic in general, regardless of one's neurotype, so let's have a brief look at why this might be. Religion has a bit of a PR problem, and by religion I don't just mean Christianity, but I will focus there as that is what I know best. Over the past 2,000 years, the church has played a dominant role in shaping Western society. Now, this in itself is not a bad thing. It's just a statement of fact. The values and teachings of Jesus have been truly instrumental in shaping our modern Western world. But as humans, we don't always get things right or keep a level perspective, and this is where religion comes in. These really great teachings and values have over centuries been twisted and, dare I say, perverted by people and used to create extra rules and even shape whole cultures. And on occasions, this has meant that Christian society has mistreated vulnerable groups or, even worse, committed genocides falsely in the name of Jesus. Now, my intent is not to dwell on this point in the context of this podcast, but as an example, we can look back to the Crusades and see how the Crusaders pillaged their way through Eastern Europe, wiping out whole towns, particularly Jewish towns, in the name of God. So going back to my original point, This is just one example of great evil being done in the name of God. And just a single example of how through history Christianity has caused its own PR disasters through misunderstanding the teachings they were supposedly defending, and by letting power, both individual and corporate, stomp on the values and teachings that put them there. There are so many other examples, but again, that is a topic for another podcast. The other aspect of how religion misses with the modern world is going back to the idea of culture. Organised religions of all types have developed their own internal cultures. Now again, this is neither good or bad, but what it means is that it can make religion less accessible to anyone who is on the outside. Now, what about autistic people? Why might religion pose an issue for us? Well, autistic people generally demonstrate strong personal values in areas such as truth, fairness, honesty and justice. Now, interestingly, these are values that many religions share. So why the disconnect? Well, as we have seen in some of the previous examples, when a society that claims to be based on religious values acts in ways contrary to those beliefs and values, well, the autistic BS detector activates and recognises this for what it is: a load of old cobblers. And this is even worse when it is actual religious groups who so obviously ignore their core teachings and beliefs to act in ways contrary to those values. Now, autistic people have a reputation of not being good at reading social cues or faces, etc. But when it comes to reading the subtext of what is happening, we are master decoders and again see the BS, which for many autists can result in a complete rejection of religion. Beyond these issues, what we have also seen through history is religions competing with each other and wars in the names of God between religious faith groups. The insanity of this beggars belief, as each group predominantly worships the same God despite their different beliefs. Now, I've painted a maybe unfairly bad picture of religion to this point, so I want to balance that up a bit. There is so much about religion that can be good, positive and true. To this end, many autistic people are also drawn to religious experiences and communities where the values and actions of these communities match their words. And that is awesome. So what has been my experience of church and religion? Well, for the most part, my experience has been truly positive. I grew up in a small but vibrant church that had a real focus on things like social justice and helping others. I have also worked in Christian organisations and have been happy to serve in that way. And these things were totally consistent with my values and beliefs. But church and community, even good ones, can create challenges for an autistic person. The people are all generally really nice, but being autistic means that the constant social interactions that seem normal in any place of worship can be overwhelming. Particularly in my youth and as a younger adult, I truly wanted to be part of this vibrant community of people, and I was. But as I started to get a bit older, I found I was less able to maintain that constant social interaction and started to move away from being a regular church attender. A large contributing factor in this was the constant expectation of involvement in certain groups and activities. These groups include things like weekly Bible study small groups, but also the expectation of being a part of things like church maintenance groups or welcoming or making the coffees, etc. For most autistic and indeed other neurodivergent people, these expectations internally get interpreted as demands. And many neurodivergent people experience demand avoidance, which is sometimes known as pathological demand avoidance or PDA. And the typical response to these demands is, as the name suggests, avoidance. This was also not helped by attitudes of some people that if you're not attending a small group, for instance, you are not really a Christian. I can't think of a better way to drive a neurodivergent Christian from a church than by having these types of attitudes. Likewise, the feeling, although this was not actually said to me, that if you're not part of one of the groups helping run the church, you're not pulling your weight. Now, as an undiagnosed autistic person, I was struggling with the competing thoughts of wanting to stay a part of these communities, but finding the social and communication challenges, as well as the demands, all extremely overwhelming. So over time, I gradually exited the church communities I was involved in. Now, I have to say here that my friends in these communities in no way abandoned me as I gradually backed away from my church attendance. These awesome people are still among my closest friends, and they do indeed embody the values of the Christian teachings. Now, another aspect of my church life that really does relate back to this topic goes back to the subject of religion. One of the main things that I did learn during my long time as part of these vibrant communities is that faith and religion are not quite the same thing. And this is where my earlier point comes in about the fact that I am not religious. Despite having a strong personal relationship with God, I don't feel the need to have ritual, or in broader terms, religion, wrapping around that. For me, it's not about religion, it's about relationship and my personal interaction with my God. Now, there is so much more I could say here, but this podcast is about autism and not some sort of evangelical outreach. So while I'm more than happy to have those conversations, those things might sit better in another podcast also. Now, didn't I say I am also religious in my starting paradox? Well, yes, I did. And this is where my autism really kicks in. As autistic people, many of us can actually relate strongly to individual rituals and routines. After all, this is part of the autistic diagnostic criteria, right? It's in these things that I would say that I am religious in one sense of the word. While the common meaning of the word does indeed refer to aspects of faith and belief, the other part of its meaning refers to following a pursuit with great devotion. Now, maybe the intended meaning here is about how we might follow God, but I tend to separate this into a more day-to-day practical mode. In this interpretation, we could possibly refer to special interests in this way, or even our daily routines, in that they are things us autistic people pursue with focus and devotion. Now, as I say, I'm probably straying a bit here from the usual use of the word, but the point I'm keen to emphasise is that religion is often about what we do and the routines and rituals we have, whereas faith transcends those actions. Now, some researchers in the cognitive science of religion hypothesise that autistic individuals' difficulty in reading the minds of others, that is, understanding unspoken cues of social interaction, might make them more likely to become atheists or non-believers. Put another way, autistic cognition and supernatural belief are incompatible, at least in the minds of these researchers. I'm not going to dwell too much on this point, but I want to respond to that briefly by saying that yes, there is strong evidence that many autistic people do reject religion. But as we say in most of these podcasts, all autistic people are different, and our response to religion is no exception. So just as you will find autistic people rejecting religion and faith, you will also find autistic people who strongly identify and advocate for their religion and faith. As we have said, autistic people, when they lock onto a special interest, will pursue that with exceptional devotion. Faith and religion as a special interest is no exception. As far as autistic people finding supernatural belief incompatible with their autism, I will refer at this point back to my previous podcast about autism, ghosts and the supernatural, and the research study I referred to exploring the experiences of autistic teens and young adults. If you haven't seen that, it may be worth watching as a companion to this podcast. I will leave a link to that in the notes and a link up on the screen somewhere up there. So why else might autistic people be drawn to religion? Firstly, religion can provide routine, whether that is regular prayer or study, as well as regular church, mosque or temple gatherings. While autistic people may find social interaction challenging, being around a group of people with aligned values, beliefs and passions can create a safe and accessible social outlet. Autistic people like to find explanations for our experience of the world around us, and religion may provide some answers where science does not quite fit. As an aside, I'm definitely not saying that science and religion are incompatible. I'm happy to debate that point with anyone. So going back to why autistic people may like religion, religion can provide clear rules and boundaries which autistic people may find comforting. And when an autistic person finds something to be true, they are likely to gravitate towards it. Also, studying scriptures could be a special interest or deep dive. And this was the case for me as a teenager and young adult. But conversely, if an autistic person perceives patterns of information that they see as false, they may reject the entirety of religion. An example here might be creation versus evolution. As the science is clear in favour of evolution, a religious group insisting on a creation timeline that clearly is at odds with evolutionary timescales will likely be seen as false by an autistic person who is faithfully trying to interpret the world as fact and truth. So this perceived obvious untruth may also cause a black and white dismissal of religion in its entirety. Also, needing to be physically close to other people in church can cause severe sensory overwhelm to the autistic person. Obvious failings, like histories of cover-ups of things like institutional child abuse, may also cause an autistic person to reject a religious group, as both the injustice and example of truthlessness will undoubtedly trigger an adverse response. Similar to this might be the perception of, or indeed actuality of, women having a lower place than men, triggering an unfairness or inequity value response. Another important point to make here is that compared to the wider neurotypical population, autistic people have much higher rates of atypical gender identities, and traditional religious beliefs about sexuality and gender have been very closed to the acceptance of non-binary gender identities. I'm not going to dive into this topic in detail here, other than to highlight the point that this is in effect shutting the door to non-binary autistic people and denying them opportunity to enter into these religious communities in safety. So how can church communities better serve the needs of autistic people and be a place where autistic and neurodivergent people feel at ease and accepted? The first thing I want to add here is that any community needs to get comfortable with the concept of having a fringe. By that, I mean be comfortable with the thought that when people come through the door, they need to be allowed to stay on the outer and observe without any pressure to participate. By all means, be welcoming, but people may still choose to remain on the fringe, and that's okay. One thing I learned many years ago is the concept that a church without a fringe is a cult. Regardless of neurodivergence, this is a concept worth understanding. I won't break this concept apart here, but the general thought is that the key way that cults work is to break connections to the outside world. You are either in or you are out, and this is the last thing we want our spiritual communities to be like. In practice, this fringe might mean that people get up and walk out or in during a church meeting, and a church needs to be comfortable with that. Autistic people may choose to leave right after the meeting and not stay around for the cups of tea or coffee, or they may stay but prefer to be on the outer and observe the social chit-chat with minimal interaction. This is completely normal for many autistic people, and we might even come and go from that communal space, maintaining a loose connection. Autistic people have sensory systems that are often overstimulated easily, and there are many aspects of church or religious gatherings that are sensorially overwhelming. From overhead fluorescent lighting to stage lights to loud worship music, smells like incense or the smell of carpet or plastic chairs might all be challenging. So wearing earplugs or even sunglasses may help if your visual or auditory senses are feeling bombarded in these environments. For me, the smell of coffee on people's breath at morning tea time or even the noise of conversation has always caused me to want to escape. And this is even before considering the social overwhelm that was also ever present. Conversely, some autistic people may find they like the sensory environment, particularly things like the smell of wood in older churches or the darker environment of traditional church buildings. But paradoxically, it might also be things like the loud worship music or flashy lights that others don't like that is a positive for sensory-seeking autistic people. Religious environments can also be highly emotional, which may also be triggering for an autistic person who is more than likely extremely sensitive to the emotions of others. The extension of this is that this emotionally charged environment might be exploitative of the autistic person in trying to elicit some kind of emotional response. And often these situations are manipulative, regardless of neurotype. The point is, no two autistic people will have the same experience and the same needs. So the important thing is letting the autistic person communicate what they need, listen and accommodate in the best ways possible. One of the best accommodations might be to make sure that the services or meetings are live streamed so the neurodivergent person can be included when they are unable to attend in person because of overwhelm or even burnout. Since COVID, live streaming events has become more common, and that's really helpful. Very importantly, if you are a church that conducts healing ministries, never try to heal someone of their autism. This is just plain offensive, as autism is not a disease or curse. By all means, on the other hand, pray for help in coping with specific traits, if that is what the autistic person desires. An autistic person wanting to be healed of their autism is more likely a symptom of the community not accepting that person's uniqueness and needs. So it's more likely the community attitudes that need healing in that case. And lastly here, I want to make an observation about how autistic black and white thinking may lead to a misalignment when it comes to understanding religious teaching. Again, talking here from a Christian perspective, there are many texts in Scripture that are written to convey meaning rather than pure facts. If this is not made clear in the teaching or preaching, then the autistic person is likely to jump straight to the literal interpretations, which can lead to, at best, an incomplete understanding, or even worse, to a complete misunderstanding of the intended meaning. For example, each of the Gospels may convey the same story with slightly different details. These differences are not an error, but convey specific meaning to the original intended recipient. The autistic person is likely to spot these subtle differences and may reach the conclusion that if the scriptures can't even get the facts right, then how can any of it be trusted? So without an explanation of the fact that communication in the ancient world was written for meaning and not facts, a modern and particularly modern autistic person may dismiss it because of what appears to be obvious factual inconsistencies. Okay, theology lesson over. As we sum up, I think an important point to make here is that each autistic person needs to be able to make their own choice about religion, faith, and participation, and not be judged if those choices seem different to their wider community. And the extension to this is that in spite of our own beliefs, be that religious or otherwise, that we respect the choices that others have made, autistic or not. Autistic people are keen watchers of people. So if our faith communities demonstrate inconsistencies between values and actions, the chances are this will be a red flag to the autistic person. And remember, every autistic or neurodivergent person is made in the image of God. Yep, that's right, autism is part of God's perfect nature, not a disorder, problem or flaw. So let's celebrate that awesome diversity as part of God's plan. Okay, so here endeth the lesson. Hopefully, if you are not a religious person, you have not been bored by some of the religious talk in this podcast. And likewise, if you are a religious person, hopefully you don't want to stone me as a heretic. My autistic faith tends to lead me down a narrow path between both camps. If you have found this useful, please like, subscribe and share for more experiences of an older autistic bloke. Bye for now.